Well, hello, 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 all you lovely people. Professor Gray here, and hey, we are halfway through unit number 5 now, which I think means, yeah, unit exam 5 is just coming up at the end of this week. I know, God, I know who made this decision. God, well, it does impact me as well, since yeah. But just remember, as always, your lowest exam grade, your lowest unit exam grade is dropped. Remember that. And also, if you've been saving up your free passes, you might have the opportunity to drop, your second lowest exam. So, start keeping that in mind. That's why I had the free passes, because I figured, yeah, this is when I'm exhausted too. So I won't. I'm with you in our own ways, right? So you have my feels. But okay, but we should say I've made it this far. You've made it this far. We're getting through it together, and I know you guys are working hard. And so just really just grind this sucker out, and you can do it. You can do it. I know you can. It doesn't feel like it though. I know you got this though. But anyhow, exam and all the rest of that coming later, as you know. For right now, let's continue on with unit number 5, which is on deontological approaches. And just recall, as what we've been talking about, deontology. Recall that deontology just says that there are other things with intrinsic moral value besides the goodness of outcomes. And as we've seen now, that those other things that matter often are, these other factors, they seem to come in the form of constraints. That is to say, limitations on what you can do. And just recall again, constraints are the idea that they limit or reduce your option set. There's just some things that are forbidden or that you should not be doing. And we've seen now already a few different ways of that you might understand these deontological approaches. So in this unit, we started with like this contrast between these utilitarian concerns for the greater good, and then comparing that with these more deontological approaches to the common good. So yeah, a contrast here between the individual and the greater good. Because recall, the greater good is especially when we're talking about utilitarianism, the greater good takes that individual good for each of us, aggregates it on up, and that assembles together the greater good. And the greater good is often seen, as we really saw now, with that corporate conception. The corporate conception does see the greater good as the good of an entity, the social entity, which is different from you and I. Yes, you and I, we contribute our good, our happiness to that social entity, but the social entity, is still distinct from us, and we can be made to serve that greater good, that social entity, because that can overrule our individual interests, especially in the times of a national crisis or emergency. Meanwhile, the common good, is this idea that there's fundamental interests that are shared by all of us, and that even in a time of crisis or emergency, we can't be asked, we cannot be expected to sacrifice those fundamental shared basic interests. Now, of course, we might have to sacrifice or give up some of our particular plans and projects. Those might be constrained, but we don't have to give up our fundamental interests, which may include things, again, like rights. So yeah, we might have to modify our plans and projects, but those are the interests that give up, not the fundamental basic interests. And of course, once we start talking about these basic fundamental interests that we all share, it's not too difficult now to imagine how rights might come out of that, because rights might, if you have a right, that then places a constraint on how I may treat you. And that seems to start, now we're getting very deontological. I can't harm you. I can't steal from you. Can't lie to you, whatever it is. And so we can see then how a concern for the common good might lead to rights and constraints in a way that the greater good, as we've seen, it might give us rights, but they don't seem to have that oomph, because they're kind of conditional on promoting the greater good. But common good says, no, you have these, period, full stop, because we share them. And then if we think about Robert Nozick, because remember that was from the previous unit, he really likes the idea of constraints and, clearly a deontological approach there. And then in that discussion, Robert Nozick does mention Immanuel Kant. And that is who we're going to be talking about, because Immanuel Kant perhaps provides the most robust defense of deontology, the most robust notion of why there might be constraints on how we treat each other in a pretty absolutist kind of way. And so, yeah, that's why Nozick mentions Kant. And so this was the module where we are going to look at the work of Immanuel Kant. And let me just be honest and very upfront. Immanuel Kant is the most difficult philosopher we'll be reading in this class. No matter how difficult you thought previous texts were, this one will be absolutely the most difficult. I've tried to make it also short, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. His writing is very dense, especially I think this module is pretty good, but the next module we are going to see some pretty technical notions that I can't avoid. Because that's the thing. Immanuel Kant is really, really important for the study of ethics. I cannot understate how important he is. It's like the analogy would be if you take a course on Irish literature, which I hope a few of you have Irish literature. Yeah, if you take a course on Irish literature, you're almost certainly going to read the works of James Joyce. And some of that work can be quite difficult too. But yeah, so it's the same thing. If you take Irish literature, James Joyce, you got to read him. And if you're taking a course on ethics, especially intro ethics, well, you got to read Immanuel Kant. There's just no getting around it. Now, I'll do my best. As you know, I will do it. And I've been working hard I won't tell you how many hours I just spent trying to organize this module because it's a monster. It's a beast, as you can tell probably already. Because I want you to understand Kant, because I think something is so important going on there that has just been so crazy influential on people and how people understand rights and lots of other things. Immanuel Kant is famous for that. I mean, that's what it's a big deal. But I will do my best to help you get through this. And what I should say, look, if by the end of this week, when we've done as much of Kant as I think any human being can handle at this time, don't feel bad if you're still confused. That's fine. That's normal. When I first read Kant, I was your age, freshman year of undergrad. It was spring of my freshman year, first year of college. And we read Kant, and I was baffled. It made zero sense to me. And only much later did the work start to click for me. So I understand. Do not feel shame if you have difficulty. Just do the best you can to get through this in one piece. And I think you'll still come away with tidbits here and there that I think might stick with you. They stuck with me because at times he's difficult, but also sometimes he's quite beautiful. But we'll get there. But I will say this. Why is Kant so difficult? I think it's actually a relatively simple answer of why he's so dang hard. It's because Kant is arguing for possibly the most severe form of deontology we will see. Because again, go back to that definition of deontology. That just means, again, deontology is just that there are other things with intrinsic moral value besides the goodness of outcome. Now, as I stated the definition, notice I'm just saying it is possible for a deontologist to think the goodness of outcomes matters. It's just, that's something to promote. It's just as deontologists, they think there'll be constraints or limitations on what you can do to promote that, goodness of outcomes, that greater good. So again, it's perfectly normal for a deontologist to think lots of things matter. Goodness of outcomes, absolutely, and then limitations on what you may do. Well, those are the constraints. But, okay, so yes, deontologists think goodness of outcomes plus other things matter. Okay, that's fine. That's normal. Maybe Nozick is like that, but that's not Kant. Kant is very severe. He is very strict because he thinks the goodness of outcomes has no value at all. I'll repeat that. Immanuel Kant believes that the goodness of outcomes has no moral value. Zero, zilch, none. And I can assume most of you think, well, come on. The goodness of outcomes must matter in some way. If like 1 million people are going to die, that should matter, right? And Kant says, nope. And so that's why Kant's setting himself up for a huge challenge, because things are going to get difficult. Because if he is saying, as he does, and we're going to see it very quickly, that the outcomes of your actions, the consequences of your actions are morally irrelevant, what's left? What could there possibly be? Yeah, if we're talking about a morality that is not about consequences and impact and outcome, what the hell is left? All Kant is going to say, the idea for this module is that Kant's going to say that he wants morality that's based on doing your duty. And that you do your duty because it's your duty. That's where we'll end this module, about how we can justify that. The morality is about doing your duty because it's your duty, not because of any good kind of consequences it brings with it. And that's the idea I want to flesh out in this module. So I'll begin this by talking about Kant's notions of the will and maxims for action. And then second, I will then explain Kant's idea of conditional goods. And all this is going to set up that big puzzle for Kant. Because Because at this point, we're going to see the goodness of outcomes does not matter for Kant. And we're going to be like, well, what the heck's left? And so this is why third, we then go into Kant and look at, what he thinks it means to do your duty, to do one's duty. And he's going to ask there, well, is there any moral worth in conforming with duty? Sadly, Kant says no. Conforming with duty does not itself matter. And so fourth, we'll see Kant ask, well, should we act out of an immediate inclination for duty? Should we want to do our duty? Kant's going to say morally irrelevant. Holy cow, what is left here? And so fifth and finally, we'll put together what he said to actually come to his positive account of the goodwill and acting from duty. So there's this module, this monster module. Yes. Oh, well, before we dive into all that, let's take our first quick break, and then we can come back and get on going.